Hello, nature journalers. My name is Kate. I'm a nature journaler and nature journal educator. And today we're going to do some color mixing as we swatch out some materials that I use specifically in workshops and also in my journaling practice. So let's get started. Previously, in another video, we swatched out the Rarlan colored pencil kit and also the Prang 15 mini watercolors, and put those in a little map so that we can see how the colors look when they're actually applied to a page, and also to pick out the primaries that we're going to use for our color mixing. Now, if you're like me, when you were in school, we were taught that color primaries were red, yellow, blue. That is not untrue, but a few years ago, John Muir Laws introduced me to this concept of the magenta, yellow, cyan, or CMYK, which is funny because I'd spent some years doing print media, and CMYK is used all the time in prepress for offset printing, etc. And so, in fact, if you take a little look at mini packages, you'll see that somewhere on the package there might be something that looks like this. This is some color testing that's used, and there's almost always these four colors, right? So CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and key for black. Occasionally you'll get a few more, but I love collecting these because they just remind me that you can mix millions of colors just from those four. So let's go ahead and take the primaries that we picked out from these two sets and do a little bit of color mixing. I'm going to start out with the colored pencils. These are a little thin for the magenta, I admit that, but still helpful. If you're working with learners who are mixing colors, you can do some layering here. So how you do that is you put together this triad, and with the magenta, I'm coloring the pink in the primary larger circle, and then two on either side so that we can use those for mixing. Then I'm going to move to the yellow. This yellow is a little sunnier than a lemon yellow, but that is what we have, so it's what we'll work with. Again, I'm putting it into the two adjacent areas, and we'll start to see an orange-ish color start to emerge here. And then the cyan into our last of our primaries. Cyan's a nice clear blue, and that will give us a more clean spring-like green, and then also into the purples and violets. Now, mixing with layering colored pencils is its own practice, and depending on the paper stock you're using, your results might vary. So we might want a little bit more of this pink into the orange mix, maybe a little bit more into the purple mix. And you only have a certain amount of layers before your paper just gets saturated and chucked up and you can't add anymore. But overall, even with just these three hues and colors, you can do a good exploration of mixing. Now, if you want to get to the browns and the blacks, that is where they all combine. This is one of the reasons that when you add a lot of different pigments together in any media, you'll start to move towards the browns. Some folks call it muddy. I think mud's lovely, but it definitely will give you more of those dulled, earthy types of hues. So you'll start to get into the browns. You can't really get to a good solid gray or black with some of these pencils, but you can definitely get a little bit more of a sagey or brownier look. So that is the set with the Rarlan colored pencils. Let's move now to the Prang watercolor and do the same thing, and then we're going to do a couple other explorations down here on the bottom of the page. So this, I'm going to use this Prang watercolor set. It's nice because it has a good number of hues in it. Still a little juicy from when I was using it before. And we've swatched this out in another video, so we've already pulled out which of these specific paints we're going to use as our primaries. So we're going to use place number 1 for the magenta, we're going to use place number 4 for the yellow, and we're going to use place number 8 for the cyan. So let's get started with that. So starting with the magenta, up in the top circle, really want a fuchsia-like pink up here. You have a couple options of the pink. I think that this one in place number 1 is a little bit more vivid, so we're going to do that. And paint on either side the 2 adjacencies. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my water brush on the arm sock and then move to yellow. And this yellow is a little more sunshiny than a lemon yellow, but again, it is what we have in the palette, so we're going to make it work. Come down here and do this adjacency, and then come back in here and mix it in with the magenta. And that'll give us our orange. Clean my brush. And now we're going to go for this sky blue cerulean cyan for the primary blue. That in there, and then we can start to see that by adding it to the yellow we get a nice spring-like fresh green. Clean the brush, and by adding it to the magenta we get kind of a violet purple. Now at any time in color mixing you might need to go back and forth across a couple of hues until you get it to where you want it. It's always a little more red, a little more blue, a little more red, a little more blue. But I think I'm going to stop there. And this paper, this color mixing sheet, is simply printed on cardstock, so it'll ball up a little bit. But I figure if things look decent on this, or if I can understand the color working on this kind of paper, it'll work on all kinds of paper. So I don't mind using really low-cost paper for things like swatch and color experiments. Now down here, because we're often introduced to primaries as a red, yellow, blue, I want to show you some of the differences that happen between using a red and using more of a magenta. So in this palette, we have a pretty good red. It's a little orangey, but I would call this like a more traditional schoolhouse red, maybe a little warmer. And then we have our magenta, which clearly looks a lot more pink. So I'll fill the magentas into these 2 mixing squares. And do the same with the red. Wow, that really is orangey. But that is the red that they've given us, so we will use it. Now when we start mixing with our other primaries, let's get some yellow into the magenta. And we'll see that that gives us the orange, similar to what we did up here, same color mix. Oh, and we'll come back, clean the brush, come back into the yellow here. Actually, because it's already got some good yellow in it, that's a pretty nice vivid orange. And then adding in the cyan, coming down here, we're going to get our purple or violety purple as we did before. But watch what happens when we use that same cyan on this orangey red. Kind of moves towards brown because there is a lot of orange in this red. So this is going to give us more of a plum-like purple. You can kind of see it, it's almost a gray because there's so much orange in that red. So you want to be thoughtful and attentive to whatever's in your palette. But if you need a good clean violet, you'll want to be really looking for a magenta. And interestingly enough, we can take this magenta and by mixing some of our yellow in it, we can actually get at this red. Might need to, as I said, work it back and forth a little bit, but you can mix more of what might be thought of as a traditional fire engine red from a magenta, but you cannot go the other way around. So you can't ever get this color from this color, but you can get, or you can't ever get this color from this color, but you can get this deeper orangier red from a magenta. That's why it functions like a primary. Let's do the same thing with the blues. I'm going to come down here and fill in our cyans. And on this one, we're going to use the ultramarine right next to it. Wow, it's got a lot of pigment juicy in there. See if we can pick some of that up. Move it around a little bit. Just a touch. There we go. Okay, so you can see these blues look pretty different. This is often more of a, if you were going to say, hey, think of blue, you'd think more of this blue. So let's see what happens when we put those magentas in here. When we put our cyan and magenta together, we're going to get back to that violet, which we've seen a few times already. And when we put it in the ultramarine, we're going to get a deeper version, but still a nice, clean, kind of pretty violet or purple. So let's do the yellows. So the cyan and yellow with that kind of spring-like green as we've seen before in the color mixing circle. And now when we add it to the ultramarine, that is a very different green. A lot deeper, a lot moodier, more sagey, maybe more natural. So a really beautiful green, but it's not going to be this bright spring green. And the same holds true down here as it did up here, in that we can take that cerulean or sky blue, and by adding some of the magenta to it, again, we'll have to work it back and forth a few times, but we can get it very close to that ultramarine blue. So you can mix a fairly okay ultramarine blue. It's not going to be quite as clear, not quite as clear as the actual out of the cake, but it will definitely be different from here. And the reason why this green is so sagey is because this blue has some red already in it. It has magenta already in it. It's going to move us more towards the browns. So anytime you combine all three of your primaries together, you're going to start to get browns and grays. And some folks will call this muddy colors. I think mud's beautiful. But this is definitely where you're going to start to get those moody, indeterminate, kind of neutral type of hues. So grays, or if you have more reds and yellow, or magenta and yellow, it's going to move more into the browns. So you can play around with that anytime you have your palette. It is always fun to explore what color possibilities happen, and working with a triad of anything. You can use any type of reddish or warm color as a magenta, as a cyan, as a yellow. They won't be called that, but you can mix around and see how a limited palette of working as primaries can give you just a whole range and a vocabulary of colors. And something that's fun to do is to actually do this activity in your nature journal. Anytime I open up a new nature journal, I always go to the very back and put in the swatches and color mixes for whatever set of tools I'm using at the time. And that way I get to see how these different paints or different materials work specifically on the paper that I'm using. So you can do a little bit of the pencils, you can do a little bit of the palette, label the colors, and then have a very good set of color vocabulary that you can use in mixing in for your nature journaling work. So hope that was helpful. Enjoy your primaries, enjoy your nature journaling practice, and have fun.